Welcome to Trampled Underfoot podcast. How's everyone doing? How you doing, Mark?
I think I'm going to make it, man. I think I'm going to make it. It was touch and go earlier, but I think I'm going to make it.
Yeah, we always seem to run into background, behind the scenes technicalities and whatnots.
Yeah.
Unless that's not what you were saying, and you're talking about the labor that you have been
Oh,
doing.
I've been killing myself. I'm married to a slave driver, man. She's driving me crazy. She just, work, 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 work. Actually, that's two words I could use to describe that was bovine scat. That's just wrong, We're doing some work around the house, and I'm doing it myself, basically. We're having a real mild summer so far. I think we hit 89 one day. We've been in the 70s and very, very low 80s. So I'm trying to get all the heavy work done outside before the heat sets in.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of pushing it, but
it's been super hot here, man. Miami. So a thing about Miami is that you always say something like throughout the summer, you'll meet someone or come across someone on the street or whatever the case, and you'll say, "Man, it's hot today." It's like a given. It's just, and you'll hear it every day of summer until the end.
yeah.
And if you don't say it, at least for me, it's like kind of like an exorcism. You have to sort of exercise that evil out of your system and at least mention the fact that it's scorching hot to get some relief. But it's been devastating, man. It's devastatingly hot down here.
Well, you get that humidity, and it's just oppressive. It just gets you. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. I mean,
yeah.
But thankfully, we don't get it that bad here. We do, but not as bad as you guys get it down there, for sure.
Yeah. It's just unreasonable in every which way you could put. I mean, you get in the car and you feel like this pressure coming up on you on each side. But let me just say, I do want to give kudos to. I think it was it Katie. She's the first one to, because we always say, hey guys, you know what? Any curious things, ideas, drop us some information so that we can think about it, enjoy it, and then see if it comes out in the podcast. It was Kate. What was that she did? She posted
the video she linked us to was a real interesting video. It was a short video of a Dick Cavett interview with Orson Welles and him talking about his touches with greatness and meeting famous people and people you've never heard of before, just regular people in day-to-day life.
Yeah.
But I mean, talking about Winston Churchill and how as a young boy, well, no, not young boy, and around college age, actually sitting at a table next to Adolf Hitler.
Mm-hmm.
Before he came to power, this is when the Nazi Party was just, how did he put it, a minority group of nutburgers and what have you.
Yeah.
And it just happened that they were at this place for this occasion, and the guy he was sitting next to was Hitler.
Yeah.
And he basically described him as completely forgettable, that the man had no personality at all. He just kind of sat there and was, a bump.
I like the Winston Churchill one, which you picked up on, first than I did, because I came after the thing. I think it was such a great thing. Do you want to tell that one?
Well, I don't remember all of the ins and outs of it, but it was an excellent story, a good Winston Churchill story. And I don't think I could do it justice. But what I'll do is after we're done recording here, I'll link that on the Trampled Underfoot Facebook page, so folks who are interested can go check it out. It's about a 12-minute long clip of Dick Cavett and Orson Welles, and he's talking about some of the famous and not so famous people that he met.
Man, I wanted to tell it. I wanted to tell the story badly.
Go right ahead. Go ahead. I'll still put the link up, but go right ahead.
Well, yeah, go check that out. And by the way, when you're over there, if you're subscribed over there or follow that page, boy, you were gonna do that whole bit. You were the one with all the energy to explain. If you haven't done so, go and like that page. Was that a plea?
Not quite a plea. I mean, we're not begging. I'm begging, while you're here on Facebook, or not on Facebook. We're not on Facebook.
We're everywhere,
not
actually.
yet, anyway.
That's not wrong.
But while we're here on YouTube, go ahead and hit that share button and share it to your Facebook page and see if we can get a few more people over here watching. Just see how that works. Think of it as a social experiment, and you are the experimenter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can also check out those juggling videos. Mark juggles 5 knives while they're lit on fire.
Only 5? Oh, man.
Yeah. So, so Churchill, he's at this resort, and Orson Welles is at a resort with a Russian, and it was after the time of the war, but there was the tradition of the Russians and the British. The British were trying to, you know, create certain tactical moves against Hitler. The Russians were afraid that if England had too much power, they would run amok, and vice versa. There was all this building up animosity.
Right.
So, but this is after the war, and Churchill is sitting at this resort where there's beaches and whatnot, and Orson Welles is trying to convince this Russian investor to invest in one of his films, and he's walking through the restaurant of the hotel, and as he's walking by, Churchill actually nods his head slightly, recognizing Orson Welles. But that's all he did, right? And the Russian was like, "Holy smokes, this guy and this and that." And then he explains that this is a white Russian, not a red Russian. Orson Welles does in the thing, explaining the fact that you had Russians that were totally into the communistic thing, and then you had people that were like into the capitalistic, and this is one of the capitalistic. The whole thing is funny, but then later on, he got that deal with that Russian guy, Orson Welles did. But later on, he came across during that time Winston Churchill, and he says, "Hey, Winston, when this is what happened to me. He likes you so much, that when he saw you nod, you totally made a deal for me just with that." And he was like, he listened to all that. Next time they walked around, because it was like a weekend sort of thing, they're walking around, and Winston is sitting there, and they're walking by. Winston gets up, and he completely bows in front of Orson Welles. And it's just such a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And the guy just went nuts after that. He was so impressed that Churchill actually nodded at Orson Welles that the next time they went through, Churchill stood up and bowed to him. It was just like, holy cow.
Yeah, man. So I thought that was a really good one, Katie.
That's a funny story.
Yeah, thank you for contributing that. And so if you guys have stories, curiosities around the web, we're totally open to these things, and you could go to our Trampled and drop a link, or even tell us a story or an idea or whatever curiosities you have, and that may make their way into our conversation here. Why not, right?
Certainly. Give us some feedback. That's how we get feedback from you. Let us know if we're doing a good job, bad job, or something you want to talk to us about, or just, something you think we might enjoy. And thank you, Katie Dotson. We do appreciate that.
Yeah. So what do we have on the roster today?
Oh, boy. I don't have anything specific on the roster. We've kicked around a couple of ideas. I guess you had some pretty neat experiences in your ancestry search.
So you want to talk a little bit about that? Just a little overview?
I'm real interested in that.
All right. So there's a lot there. So I'll just try and streamline it to the parts that, make sense and sort of. So Spain is a country in Europe that has Spanish people in it.
You want to slow down a little bit? I'll see if I can follow this.
But now, there's a lot of people that consider Spanish just a monolithic sort of thing, and it's totally not the case. There's people all over the world and whatnot. But to my story, I've been doing the ancestry search, and my grandfather was from Spain. Now, he was from a village or a township that's quite small. I guess you could say township or whatever. In Spain, in a place called Santander, in the north of Spain, and he moved out of there a long time ago. And so, we're in America. We don't, it's generations after, so it's like But I have come through the magic of Facebook in contact with a cousin that lives in that area. And so what ends up happening is that I decided to reach out to her, since I'm doing all this sort of like ancestry search and all that. And thanks to Steve Nealon, it also, and I'll say this, Steve, it helps to create a actual tree that you can visualize. And it also helps the fact that this website helps connect all this information. So, oh, that's that guy, and they were here during that time. Oh, that lady married this one, and so on. And it creates a timeline. A lot of people may not be interested in this, but I've always been very interested in history, such as Mark, and he does ancestry as well, right?
Yeah. Yes, I do.
You want to say anything about that?
Well, no, this is your story. Go for it. I mean, I'll chime in with a few things, but I'm genuinely interested in what you found out.
So, there have always been what Mark, because since we've talked about this before, Mark and I, and he mentioned a word, and I think it's called family lore. Can you explain?
Family folklore. It's basically every family has stories about this relative was a sea captain and he did this and that and the other. Or in my particular case, it was a grandfather who came out with his twin brother and worked in the gold fields of California, and the twin brother died, and the grandfather worked his way back to, basically walked back to Missouri from California, just sick of the entire gold thing. Well, it turns out they never came out here to California together. He did have a twin brother. His twin brother was killed in a riverboat accident when a steam boiler exploded. So they never came out and worked the gold fields. So that family folklore, those stories were just wrong. But you don't know that until you go back and you trace certain things and you find people. So
that's exactly it. So it's kind of like my grandfather had first account knowledge of his area. He was born in 1911 in Santander, Spain, in a little place called Maliano, which has a street where my last name Escajedo is at. Because there was a forefather, an uncle of his that was a priest. He was ordained, and he was also, strangely enough, incredibly fascinated with the lineage of the people of that area. And we're talking about ancient, medieval, and just going back in time into the beginnings of European, existence. And this is what that guy did. And he would travel to Madrid and other locations, and he'd go into those libraries, into those churches. They'd open up these books that at the time, he was born in the 1870s or 1860s, probably. I've got the date somewhere there. This uncle, and he would open up these books, and they were ancient and old and weathered at his time. Back in the early 1900s, he was born in the 1800s, went through. So he gathered that information. So there's this town, and my grandfather left all that years and years and years and years ago. So, I mean, since the 1920s or 30s, probably. I don't know that information exactly. But I reached out to a cousin that we had talked before in the past, and I asked her to really sort of hone it down and give me some information, and she proceeded to record audio over there on Facebook and leave me little, because I think it's like 50 seconds or a minute long each. And I've got like a series of these audio, and she's hitting me with information. There's pictures and all sorts of stuff. And I've been able to puzzle together all these things so that now I have a more concrete timeline. She mentions, this is the interesting part. There's more to say about that, but just putting that to the side for a second, she mentions that we are, or that name, because I would be only a half or a quarter, because it's or whatever my father through his father's father, whatever percentage of that comes to me would be that part of me, right? Because you have
right
your whatever, however the thing is, we'd have to call in Steve to or you could tell us, how does that work, just for people out there?
You get 50% of your DNA from your father and 50% of your DNA from your mother, but you do not get an exact even split. You know, so you do get half of one and half of the other, but you don't get every single scrap of DNA that your mother has, nor your father. So, for the sake of argument, if your mother was part Italian, which I believe she is, correct?
Who?
Your mother?
No,
No,
no.
it's your father that's part Italian.
My father on
Okay.
the mother's side, they
Okay.
have Italian lineage.
Okay. Well, you may or may not have any of that Italian lineage in you, in your DNA makeup, which is why when they do DNA analysis on family for ancestry purposes, they try to get as many family members as they can. They get a more complete picture that way.
Okay.
So,
So for all I know, I could have all the Spanish and none of the Italian. I could have other. You just don't know.
Right. Correct.
Okay. So, so these people, my cousin from Spain, she tells me the following. She says, we belong to a group of people, that, and there's a name for it. I think it's called paisegos is the word. I hope I didn't butcher that, but we belong to a group of those people that lived up in the mountains.
Okay.
Or at least that family line that lived up in the mountains, predating, and they've done studies and DNA tests of going back since the beginning of actual DNA testing. They've worked their way, and there's studies. And I went and read after we had talked and did the Facebook thing, and these people were people up in the mountains. There's a helicopter outside my window. They might be coming to get me because of this secret information that I'm revealing to the world. Do you hear the helicopter?
I hear an aircraft, yeah, and I'd be concerned. After last week's episode, nothing would surprise me.
Oh yeah. Google is coming after you. So anyways, these people live up in the mountains, but they predate the population. They predate arrival, DNA wise.
Yeah.
And they say that these were people that were arrivals in, like, just I don't even know. I'd have to go back to the papers, but like before that whole, and they ended up in the mountains, and they would build little houses and whatnot. They'd farm the areas, but they were isolated. And during Spanish, as Spain became Spain, or pre, and I'm paraphrasing, right? This is by no means the actual account. They suspected when they came across these people of these people being Jewish, because they weren't necessarily, they perceived them as being of a different stock. Or conversely, they perceived them as being Moors. And they weren't treated as such, but they were like, the population was kind of like who are these people that, and then they sent missionaries or to see what the Christianization thing, and throughout history, they didn't practice the Christianity quite as the people in the towns did. It was there, and there was some paganistic Roman time inclusions into their behaviors of rituals, weird stuff. Not extreme, but like things that didn't make sense from a Catholic point of view. There was Christianity, but it was like it's as if going back to Roman times.
Okay.
And they were isolated there. So there's a lot of weird things with all that, but I think that the questions continue with that, but they basically have a lot of people say that that these people are the equivalent of what you'd get with the Vasque people, and so they're an isolated group. Now, to finish this off, my grandfather would always tell me stories when I was a kid of that. Not as explicit as what we're saying now because I was a kid, but he explained the mountains, the time on the mountains, and all these things. And these people were farmers. They had cattle, and they worked. And the clouds hit the mountains. That's how high this place is. So I found it super fascinating. I have a lot of information to dig through, and that's just one branch through my father of curiosity. I just found it fascinating.
But your grandfather had stories and told you stories of his time of living in the mountains?
Well, his so to be specific, my grandfather was orphaned, and so his uncle, the priest that I had mentioned before, took his care, and the village he lived in the village or the town, and then
Yeah.
the mountains are right. They're kind of like Colorado, Denver, and then you
Yeah.
go up the mountains. It's
Mhm.
kind of the same thing. So he lived down there. So he
Oh,
didn't live up in the mountains, but
oh,
those people didn't remain. All those people in the another part of it, those people actually, not all of them stayed. They were clustered for hundreds and hundreds of years or more, but you have people that leave
right.
and go
Sure.
to the towns because some people don't want to
Right.
raise cattle and or whatever the heck. And so, but the tradition is, and according to, she gave me information, I'll clarify more, but according to, this is, I would say this is still lore because you'd have to trace, but there's a lot of information. They come from those people up in the mountains, and they're not necessarily looked upon as the most um, sophisticated. Let's say
Yeah.
they're people that live and farm in the mountains,
Okay. Okay. Spanish hillbillies.
pretty much. Well, and there's videos of them talking and stuff on the internet, and it's like shocking because when they get old,
Mhm.
they look like my grandfather. Look, there's a certain big ears and bushy. There's a certain look. I don't know.
Well, I don't know.
So that was it.
I'm just looking behind you to see if there's a banjo hanging on the wall.
Well, another
Oh,
thing, and I did a lot of reading, but I can't do it justice by any means. But their music wasn't necessarily like what you would expect banjo. It was more like pipes and like little. It's very medieval stuff, dude. And their clothing too. Like there's a whole. It's like these are people from a whole sort of like weird. It's weird. Their water comes from streams that are trickling.
mhm.
Just a bunch of their houses. Last thing I'll say, their houses are two stories, stairs on the outside. On the bottom, the cattle live on the bottom. On the top, they live.
There are a lot of areas of extreme southern Germany that are that way still to this day. Yeah, you get down into the Tyrolean regions of northern Italy, Austria, that band of Austria that sweeps down just above Italy and just below Germany. You see that a lot there. All their animals were downstairs and they lived up above. And it is, as you say, the stairs were outside, and that's how you went into the house, was you went up the outdoor steps, knocked on the door there. And the cattle were all downstairs. They did it. And in some of those areas, they were built into hillsides. So, you had heat from the earth, heat from all the animals and everything, with a few odors, I would imagine,
Yeah.
helping to keep the place warm.
So a few
So,
cow farts.
well, you do what you got to do to stay warm, and you can be pretty well sure that nobody's stealing your animals because you're right there.
Yeah.
So
Well, you have to have some brass, you know,
yeah,
jewels to go up into mountains in the middle of nowhere and
yeah,
try to run off with a cow.
yeah. Because where are you going to go?
You have to go
Yeah,
downhill is the only place that you keep. If you keep going up, I mean, you're in trouble.
yeah.
So I found it fascinating, Mark. I'll share some pictures of how they looked, their dress. Another thing that they, because throughout the Middle Ages, and then breaking out after, there was a lot of suspicion they have to be Jewish, you know,
Mhm.
and they would draw them with tails sometimes.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, because
Well,
remember Spain was basically overtaken, and it wasn't Spain. It was all
right,
basically, it was just land. There were
right.
people that, but it was in the control of caliphate,
Uh-huh.
of Moorish people.
Well, now, did these people have a reputation as like bandits or something like that? People trying to pass through on the trade routes or what have you, come down out of the mountains and rob or anything like that, or
No, but there was animosity towards some Semitic people
okay,
because of overtaking and Christianity and all the things that we know. And these people lived so isolated. I'm not even talking about like across the road and here in Sweetwater behind the bagels or behind the bagel store or whatever. I'm talking about like they're freaking, the clouds are starting to cover. You're going up trails and it just becomes a thing.
right,
And they suspected. Plus, when they would go visit for censuses and all that kind of stuff, and the actual church, they would notice that their traditions weren't necessarily fully Christian, and they
right.
were suspect. And
Okay,
and not only that, they also attributed their clothing. They had they had variations in their clothing, and they did have, we've spoken about this before, but they had, there was some sort of, and their Spanish was different,
mhm,
not extreme, but there were words, and they had words that were Basque related, which Basque is related to some Gaelic sounding thing. There's some weirdness going on there. What it is, you know, I don't know, but they suspected these people of having either Moorish or Jewish, because remember that was a big deal.
right,
They wanted to reconquer the area for Christianity
right.
and all that. So, but they've done DNA, they've done all sorts of stuff. Things don't add up for it to be a Jewish thing or a Moorish thing. However, they do align more with isolated people like the Basque, or the Galicians,
Mhm,
towards the west and stuff. So there's tribes up in there, or people that carry. I bet you nowadays, you go down to the city and you see a hot little number, and what are you going to do? Say no? No, I'm keeping the program isolated into the mountains, baby. I can't go with you. Or do you
yeah.
say, hey, Toots, let's go party? I mean, I go for the latter. I don't
Well,
know.
number one, you can tell you've been out of circulation for a while because that line will get you nowhere. Uh, but number two, yeah, I get exactly what you're saying. I mean, the about the only people that would stay up there would be people who wanted to stay up there, and not everybody does. You'd have to have some sort of a connection to it to want to stay there, you know. But sure, I mean, that kind of thing is fascinating to me. Not only family history, but getting some confirmation on that family history, because now you've got stories coming from two different angles. I mean, the things that your grandfather has told you, and now you can get some verification from your cousin. I mean, I don't know how deeply she has dug into the family lineage or anything, but I mean, short of going to Spain yourself, you're kind of having to rely on what information they can find.
She also said that there's, and this is again from lore,
Hmm.
and it's doubly so, but she said that there's two families that a long time ago broke apart with the name Escajedo in in the in the higher parts of that township, Maliano. And so there's people out there, and she doesn't know what has happened with them. So that part's a mystery. I have to investigate that, but there could be very much people that broke off a long, long time ago that still carry the name as well. So that's another. And the funny thing is, there's not a lot of people with the name. I mean, there's like a few thousand with the name, and you could search online and do like name search and the numbers and stuff. It's a very weird thing. So it's an isolated name. It's
Yeah,
weird. It's weird for me because that, but that's just one branch. I also have other branches, but fascinating to say the least.
yeah, yeah, no
Yeah.
doubt, no doubt. Well, good, good, because I know you've been stuck there for a while. So glad
Well,
to.
I need names to attach from my grandfather to his father and his father. That's really where I want to go with it, so
Right.
that, I mean, within reason,
Sure.
but so that I could see that, because I have my grandfather's father's uncles now.
Mhm.
That's one of his uncles. The cousin of mine.
Mhm.
It's one of my grandfather's father's uncles. His one of his uncle's sons' daughter.
Okay.
So we're first cousins twice removed. I think it is.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And they had 12 of them.
Well, farm families back then, they had a ton of kids. I mean, because that was free labor.
Now I don't know. I don't know necessarily. Yeah, but I don't know how that looked. So I'm saying the story she gave me, and that but I don't know if they were all up in the. So I don't know that detail. But she
Sure.
said that we are of that group of people, and she said it
Sure.
emphatically, like as if. But then again,
Mhm.
we have to keep searching and seeing. But
Well, as I say, you don't know how far she's dug back into the lineage either. I mean, so because not everybody is interested in this kind of stuff. I think it's fascinating. My grandkids don't care. My brother, he's kind of meh, but my father and I were seriously into it, and I just think that it's one of the coolest things that there is, just
did
personally.
did you know that Steve has an ancestor that's shocking?
I think we all more or less do.
And I'm talking about in recent times. No, from back in the day.
Uh, I don't,
Uncle Bob, man, that guy's
I don't know where you're going with this, but I'm all ears. Let's have it.
the other the other night we were on Hangouts and we were doing a little bit of the ancestry thing, and I said, "Oh, Steve, so how far back can you go on your tree line?" I don't even know if he wants me to tell this story.
Well, yeah, he might not.
I don't think he'll mind. I mean, thinking, will he mind? I don't think he'll mind. I think it's a cool thing. He could say it on the chat thing as I'm saying it, and I could stop at any time. If you're not watching, Steve, for whatever reason, then that means that you'll never see this, and so it doesn't matter anyways. But hopefully you'll say, okay, yeah, no problem, it's cool. So we'll see if he pops up at any time. So we're doing it. I said, "Oh, dude, can you tell us, or can you tell me how far back can you go?" And he says, there is one guy way back in 1130 or 1160."
Mhm.
And I said, "What? 1130, 1160?" And he says, "Yeah, dude." And I said, "Well, can we talk? Can we investigate a little bit?" I love that freaking what is it? Watson, and what's the other, Sherlock Holmes. I like that. I like investigating. It's
Uh-huh.
fun. Oh, he said go ahead. Okay, so hey, it gets messy from here, folks. So he starts checking and we start checking, and he says, "Okay, the name is such and such." And it was a weird name. And I'm like, "So who is this guy?" He says, "Well, I mean, that's as farthest as we started doing searches. We found his name out on the web in actual official documentations and whatnot. The guy ends up being married, and he has a title
Mhm.
out in England and Germany too. It's
Mhm.
weird. And he had a title back in the 1100s,
Mhm.
some sort of um, religious title, right? I don't know what the actual title was. It's this is not going to be a very exact retelling, but he was married. Get this, Mark. He was married. That guy that's Steve's relative
Mhm.
was married to the aunt of King Harold the First.
King Harold.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it's documented. And it's documented, Mark. Like you could see the connections. Oh, and they recounted in other. So Steve officially is, I don't even know what the thing is, but is connected to that person, and they served. I think stuff like that is fascinating, dude.
Yep. Yep. Well, I can't top that. I got no royalty that I know of. I think there was one. I think there was one Earl back in the day, but we're not 100% certain. Um, and that's why we do it a little bit differently. If we cannot document it, we don't believe it. It's just kind of set off to the side. There's one shirt tail cousin has run the family history back into the 1053 or something like that, but we cannot prove it, so we don't go there. We're stuck in the um, mid 1600s, but and that one is kind of tenuous. We're not 100% certain on that yet.
Yeah.
But we need documentation of some sort from at least one source. But as far as that's concerned, I guess my only claim to fame would be being a cousin of Jesse James,
That's
Frank
cool.
Jesse James. But other than that, and the Applegate brothers. But other than that, that's about it. I don't have any royalty or anything like that.
Well, that you know of.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly that I know of. It's all peasant stock. Some Highlanders, some Lowlanders, but all peasant stock basically. So.
Well, you say that, but we do not know. And and why
Yeah.
is it? Why is it that we seek out the extra? I'll ask you this. By the way, there's still a helicopter buzzing. I think that Google is after. You should check out our previous episode. They're just hovering above.
The Google copter.
Why is it that we're always so darn, fixated on finding the extravagant ones? How about the regular people that churned and churned and churned and churned and did it their way because they had no choice because they were, it was hell on earth back then. But, why is it that we always are fascinated by, holy smokes, you see the Duke of Earl, like Jim Bashir said.
Yeah.
Jim Bashir said that Steve is now the Duke of Earl.
That's it.
Why do we gravitate to those people, Mark?
Well, because we all aspire to be something a little bit more, I think.
Yeah.
And bragging rights, for if nothing else.
Total bragging rights.
I mean, if you, but then again, you have to kind of temper it and remember a little, keep it in perspective. If you go back far enough, let's see, I'm trying to remember how this went. I read this just a few years back. It wasn't that long ago, that if you were born on continental Europe or the UK after, I want to say it was 1930, you are a descendant of Charlemagne. And it has to be simply because of the number of people that have existed, the number of generations you go back. Because you have two parents, each of those parents had two parents, each of those had two parents, and you keep going further and further and further back. Your tree keeps going back further and further and further. It's more people than have ever existed. So the lines had to have crossed and become compacted.
Mm-hmm.
And they have extrapolated out that you go back into the 1200s. If you were born in continental Europe today, you are a descendant of Charlemagne. It has to be, because somewhere the bloodlines crossed.
Well,
and
yeah.
Therefore, you have to be related to Charlemagne.
I mean, we did that calculation too the other night. Steve and I did. And man, if you went back and did that, doubling your parents, grandparents, and continue, there'd be more people than ever lived, like you just mentioned. And they were getting funky with. And let me tell you something, dude. I think we're at 7 million or 7 billion on Earth. That's poised within 50 years or so to go up to like 9 or more.
You get out into Western China, from about the middle of the country out west, 8% of the male population has a common ancestor that they think could possibly be Genghis Khan. They're not 100% certain, but they share a common ancestor, 8% of the population, of the male population. So, but you got to remember, the Mongols were all over the place. They ravaged the entire European continent and came Asian continent, and came well into Europe as well.
Yeah.
So they were not always the quiet little peace-loving folks that they are today.
Yeah.
They were murderous bands, and that was all there was to it. But but 8% of the population shares one common ancestor, and especially that big of a population.
Wow,
So,
dude.
but then again, at the time of his death, he had 500 wives. So, you know.
Well, here's the kicker, because I just remembered this. I was talking to Billy and Greg, Snow Crusher, and we were talking the other night, and I saw a documentary that was shocking as well.
Yeah.
They found in South America a lot of skulls that were of African origin, and that they were dated way before indigenous.
Mm-hmm.
And these were scientists. This is like a scientific thing, like, archaeological, like a whole thing. And they concluded that there were these tribes of people there. How they got there, they explained something kind of sort of that maybe this and that, but they were there living forever and ever. And then the people crossed the straits, or that bridge up in Alaska, and they came down. And when they met this other tribe, and there's paintings on caves and places that are remote down in South America, and show that their paintings are peaceful and loving, and you can see people kissing, like little stick figures actually kissing. It's like a whole paradiso of freaking like love and happiness. And then these tribes came down, the natives that we know now, and then you start seeing the cave paintings with spears and stuff. They theorize, and they figure through science, and you could watch the documentary, but that they came and they ravished them. The only way that those original people were able to survive was to intermarry with those people that came. And they found two sisters in the tip of Argentina from a tribe, and they DNA'd them, and they show that they actually have origins matching those people originally, but they no longer have any of they look now indigenous of what we know, but they carry the traits of those people originally in South America. I found it very fascinating.
Well, nothing like that surprises me anymore when you think about how much exploration was in the world before the quote unquote European explorers. I mean, people seem to think that exploration by sea started happening in the 1400s, but it was going on for thousands of years beforehand. I mean, we know, for instance, that Leif Erikson came to the North American continent long before Columbus even was a thought, generations before he was even born, hundreds of years. When you look at the Pacific Islanders, the Polynesians, they know that these people settled these islands, but they all came from the Southern Pacific, from down in the Southern Hemisphere. And so they went in these huge ocean-going canoes and explored. So finding people that showed traits of being from Africa in South America is not a huge surprise to me. I mean, were they making any references to like Pangaea or Gondwanaland or anything like that, or that maybe this happened before the continent split? Or
the documentary did I don't think did. Billy Burt did the other night when we were talking about it. The Pangaea thing, where it's all the continents, were one, and it was a one massive, and then it just spread out and stuff.
Right.
It just, that makes sense to me, but I mean, have they proven that?
Yeah, because that happened way back in like the Triassic period or something like that. That was before humans were around, I believe. I may be wrong there.
But have they proven that was the case? Because it does fit South America and Africa and America and the United States and all that. If you look at it, they can make it fit.
Oh yeah, they look like pieces of a puzzle. I mean, and that's where the whole Pangaea, the theory of Pangaea came from, was just by looking at those. Now, obviously, there's been billions of years of erosion and things like that. But let's see. Now they're saying, yeah. See, Gondwana or Gondwana land was a supercontinent that existed from 550 million years ago to about 180 million years ago. And so, but that still predates humans, I believe. So, I don't think the oldest humans have ever gone more than, what, 100,000 years or something like that. I'm not sure. I don't know. But yeah, nothing like that surprises me. I mean, when you look at just about every continent but Antarctica has got a native indigenous population, and the fact that they have traveled from place to place to place, does not surprise me at all. I mean, people have wanted to know what's on the other side of the ocean ever since we've been awake and alive and aware enough to know that that was an ocean. Is that ever since we've been able to make things that float that we could sit in and paddle, we've been wanting to see what's on the other side.
Now,
So
this is a weird thing that I'm going to mention, and this crosses into weirdness, but I'll mention it anyhow because you're talking about Pangea and whatnot. There are people that have back, in time modeled the Earth, and it's on YouTube. And what they do is that they basically hypothesize that the Earth was one continent, like there was one continent, supercontinent, but it's because the Earth was small, and they're saying that the Earth is actually expanding, and the continents are drifting apart as it expands. In other words, the Earth is growing, and they have this model on the thing where they go, they shrink it to size, and they actually bring with dates on it and stuff. They do all that, but you can see that everything fits. And he says, well, it fits if you expand and contract the Earth, the size of the Earth. That brings a lot of problems, but interesting nonetheless.
sure. I mean, and it makes sense. I mean, how long have we been really of an intelligent existence? I mean, we've only been able to measure the temperature for a certain amount of time. We've only been able to explain certain phenomena for a certain amount of time, and that's not even a sneeze in the time span of this Earth. So, I mean, heck, we discover new species and new animals every day. So, the Earth expanding and contracting, why not? I mean, heck, it's a theory. We can prove it or disprove it, and but
there's issues
things
with
like
it
that
too.
things like that take time. I mean, and this kind of hits home for me out here because I'm in one of the areas known as the Ring of Fire, where we have subduction zones right offshore here, and we get earthquakes, and we have fault lines and all that other good stuff.
Yeah.
So I mean, I've heard for my entire life that one day California is going to fall into the ocean, and I kind of want beachfront property. We'll see what happens, but I mean, I remember when Mount St. Helens blew in 1980. People were just absolutely sure that that was the beginning of it, the beginning of the end. And of course, it didn't turn out that way. But yeah, there was a lot of panic, folks, for many, many, many years.
What's that big, like, was it my no isn't there one in Yellowstone Park that they say if that one blew, it would take with it half of the United States?
Yeah, that is Yellowstone Park. It is a super volcano. The whole thing is one ginormous volcano. I don't know. I don't remember exactly how many miles across it is, but it would, if it ever went all at once, if it ever built up enough pressure to blow all at once, it would take a good third of the country with it.
Literally?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, take, when you say take, you're saying,
Well, let me put it to you this way. When Mount St. Helens exploded, when it blew, 1 cubic mile of mountain vaporized and is just spread out through the atmosphere. Scientists, they disagree. Everybody agrees that debris circled the Earth 3 times. Some say 4 times. but they all agree they know at least 3 times the debris circled the Earth
Holy
and
smokes.
eventually did settle back, because there's no such thing as a lighter than air solid. But it just, a cubic mile of mountain just is gone. So if something that huge like Yellowstone were to go, yeah, it'd probably take about a third of the country with it. A third of the continent, let's say that.
But how would that look like?
We'd never see it. I mean, you might, but I think I'm too close. Something with that much force, I'd get
Yeah.
buried. I'd be buried under parts of Wyoming and Montana, and
Chief
a
Mark.
little bit of Colorado thrown in. Hey, I figure I'll never feel it. I mean, nobody here gets out alive, Eloy. Now, I'm not going to slap fate in the face, but I'll just keep living my life. It happens if it happens. I'll never feel
I
it.
told you should have moved back east.
I thought about it, but it's because I need me some Waffle House about now.
Well, but so that's savage though, because I've
Yeah.
heard them say it'll take a part of the country, and I'm like, well, wow, that's gotta be. But I mean,
Well, I may be talking, off the top of my head here. I can look it up, but the size of that thing and the amount of force that it would require to make that entire thing blow all at once, oh yeah, it would devastate the continent.
holy smokes, dude, that's some scary stuff. I mean, well, we've seen the consequence of smaller things, yet quite savage, like Pompeii. What was it? I was gonna say
Yeah,
Pompeii.
Pompeii, yeah.
Pompeii. I was saying Pompeo. Um, Pompeii. We've seen the consequences of that. People, ash frozen, in lava and whatnot.
Yep. Okay, well, looking it up, Yellowstone National Park, the Yellowstone caldera is it is 34 miles wide, 45 miles high. So it's 34 by 45 miles. It was still active, and it last erupted in 1350 BC. So,
Can you expand on? So what are we looking at as far as damage?
well, there have been people doing all kinds of studies on this forever. So a lot more than I think we have time for.
Yeah.
Just simply because it's let's
It's
see,
like in other news,
because they've been studying it for so long.
it's like a
Okay,
6 o'clock news. We have a little Bambi deer stuck here in the culvert, and in other news, we have a exploding mountain.
right. Well, what they're saying is here, the volcano is capable of burying Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, Colorado in up to 3 feet of ash, which would also blanket the Midwest. And let's see. Yeah, there's lots of speculation going through here.
Meanwhile, in Miami, Jimmy Buffett is drinking another margarita.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and they're going into a lot of different, how much magma and how much ash and this, that, and the other. But suffice it to say, probably about a third of the country would just be wiped out. Because you figure you bury that many states under 3 foot of ash, it's not like this stuff just gently trickles down from the sky. We're talking poof.
Oh, really?
Yeah. What goes up must come down, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be gentle about it. So.
Oh, I mean.
But other than that, hope everybody has sweet dreams tonight.
Well,
especially those of you living in Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, Colorado.
For all you woodworkers out there, suggest you doing a outdoor dust collecting system by Jet or some other company and help with the debris.
Oh yeah.
Boy, dude, that's savage.
Yep.
So putting that to the side for a second, could we jump into a little bit about the movies to wrap it all?
Sure.
Movies. What do you
Yeah,
got?
movies. What about them? Oh, you wanted to talk about movies. Well, now you just said, well, maybe we should talk about movies. Did you have something special in mind? I mean, I know I like old movies. I've been a fan of old movies since I was like 9 or 10 years old.
I kind of was thinking sort of something along the lines of like, you know, what was meaningful. So we all have different, you know, it's all different, but what was meaningful to you as far as movies, you know, that were important to you for whatever number of reasons that you found important?
I don't know if I found them important other than I just liked them. Now, I'm a comedy nut.
You don't see, I don't mean to cut, but do you see any movies have, they're a social glue in a way, more back then than now,
Mhm.
but like there's repercussions to them on many levels, but you don't see that sort of.
You know, I've always been more pedestrian when it comes to watching a movie. I go there to be entertained. I like the plot line. I don't look for a lot of symbolism. I'm there to be entertained for a couple of hours, and
Right.
that's about it. I mean, and I think that's one of the reasons why I am the way I am about movies, in that the more the critics say they love them, the more I know I'm going to hate them, because they'll pick apart a movie and talk about the symbolism of this scene and the symbolism of that scene and the overall statement of what was going on. And I'm like, dude, he's walking his dog. You know, there's not a lot of symbolism in that. The dog has to go, and he doesn't want him to do it in the living room. So,
Right.
you know, uh, so as far as meaningful films, I'm the wrong guy to talk to about that. I know what I like and I know what I enjoyed.
But wait a
Um,
sec. I don't want to push back too much, but there is that intent in movies that you just spoke of.
Certainly, and I
Okay.
know there is that intent.
Okay.
And as far as any kind of a movie with a quote unquote message is concerned, I don't know that it would really count as a movie. It was a British movie made for TV, but it was 1984
Okay.
by George Orwell. It was done in the early 1960s, and it's floating around on YouTube.
Hmm.
Um, as far as the meaning of the movie in what could be, what could come, what they were trying to warn against back in the day, because you
Hmm.
got to remember that that was written back in the 1940s, and some would say it's already starting to come to pass, others wouldn't. But as far as a movie with a deeper meaning, I think that would probably be it.
Okay.
You know, that gets off into books and what have you, because the book is much, much better than any movie ever could be, because a book can go into so much more detail. And it was that way with 1984. And in fact, I just read that. I finished it again about 2 months ago, 3 months ago, maybe. And
Oh wow.
yeah. Oh, yeah. I dig out the books every once in a while and dive into the classics, you know, 1984, Red Badge of Courage. They Were Expendable, things like that. Um, Maltese Falcon, Little Dashiell Hammett there. You were talking about Sherlock Holmes. I've got the complete works of Sherlock Holmes, and I finished that about 8 months ago again. So the stories are brilliant. The movies were okay. There's only like two of them, I think, that follow any of Conan Doyle's stories. But other than that, so 1984 is the one meaningful movie that I really liked. And I couldn't really tell you much more. I don't recognize any of the names of the people who are in it. But if you look up for 1984 UK television,
Yeah.
you'll find it. It's there. It's a good view. It's a good movie to watch.
And as far as for sheer the pleasure of it.
Sheer pleasure, entertainment value. I have to go back to my top three, which was American Graffiti,
Okay.
12 O'Clock High, and then the old Marx Brothers Duck Soup. Um, they all have their place. They're all completely different. I mean, American Graffiti is about a bunch of kids the last night of summer in 1962, and some of them are getting ready to go off to college. And this is just the adventures that happen overnight. Um, drag racing and picking up girls, and relationships breaking up and then making up. And I mean, it was just um, not so much a coming of age story as it was a story that I could relate to in my teenage years. And I always liked that kind of music. I've been a car guy forever, and the music is what drew me in. And I just got, lost in the storyline and following the different characters throughout the night. A lot of fun. It's a real fun movie.
Awesome.
You know,
Any honorable mentions?
um, like I say, I am a comedy guy, but 12 O'Clock High was done in like 1949, and it's about a bomber squadron in the UK, about a U.S. bomber squadron, and the trials and tribulations of that squadron. And what attracted me to it was, at the time, because I remember reading about it still, even though, it was 20 something years old when I first heard about it. The Army Air Corps vets were saying that that was the closest thing to what really happened. And it was written by a couple of Army Air Corps vets who were in the bomber command over there, 8th Air Force, I believe. And the characters were composites of a few people they knew over there, and some of the events that happened in the movie were based on real events, and a couple of them really, really close to being 100%. Of course, they took some artistic license here and there because you have to create conversation. But very good movie, very intense movie.
Nice.
So
I gotta check that one out.
yeah, it's black and white, so kids don't like it. But for drama, it's a very, very good movie.
How
One that
about
makes you think.
okay? Well, how about movies that neither good or bad in reference to your opinion of them per se,
Mhm.
but are in your memory, and that, let's say, you were accompanied by a parent, a friend, brother, sister. Just can you remember the movie and who you were with and whatnot? Do you have any of that in your memory banks?
Oh, there are all kinds of movies we went to see at the drive-in, and just one that sticks in the back of my brain now is it was a movie with Lou Gossett and James Garner, and it was called The Skin Game.
Okay.
And this is back during slavery. And so you had these, Lou Gossett is a free black man from Maryland, I
What
believe.
year is this?
This is back before the Civil War. This is during slavery times.
Okay.
But he's a free black man, and his buddy is James Garner, and they're a couple of con men. And what they do is they sell Lou Gossett into slavery over and over and over again. Then James Garner breaks him out, and then they move on to another town where they sell him again, and they break out and move to another town and just
Oh,
go
that's awesome.
all over the place. Well, they finally end up getting stuck in a position to where he can't get Lou Gossett out, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on. It's a comedy type like movie, but it's got some serious themes to it. But they're just a couple of con men, and it's a strange premise. It's a weird premise, but it was a good movie. It's kind of weird to be even talking about it today, that somebody would come up with a premise like that, but it worked back in the time, and it was a funny movie.
There was some trippy stuff back then. People, I think that our listeners might agree to it to one degree or the other, but there was a lot of cool stuff happening all throughout cinema history, and black and white. I understand when you see the lack of, the fact that it's a little bit more limited, that people might be turned off because they're exposed to so much color, sound, and all these things. But there's a warm sort of feeling going back and watching those, like a cozy feeling,
Yeah.
um, to watching those old things. I would sit with my grandfather, the one that left Spain, here in Sweetwater, and we'd watch Tarzan in black and white on Sundays. We'd watch what you call Abbott and Costello, the Three Stooges. You know, he enjoyed, and cowboy movies from back in the day. It was quite entertaining and stuff. And there's a warm, I don't know if it is a warm feeling because I remember it that way, or it's because they intrinsically have sort of more of a like, it's like carving out a little space and time so
Mhm.
you can sit in and say, like sitting in a jacuzzi of its era and just enjoying that little moment. I don't know how to explain it.
Well, yeah, I'm with you. I never really put a whole heck of a lot of emphasis on black and white versus color because you got to remember, I was 16 before we got our first color TV. And by that time, I had my driver's license. I didn't want to hang around and watch TV. I was gone. So
Yeah,
most of the TV watching I did up until the time I was married and moved out was on a black and white television because, I was out and about and running around. I met my ex-wife. We dated and married, and I could only afford a black and white TV. I couldn't afford a color TV when we set up our household.
yeah,
So for many, many years, that was all we had. And I never had a problem with anything in black and white. And I think it's kind of, as you say, it does bring a little bit of a warmth to it.
yeah,
I mean, I'll get on a binge here where I'll get on YouTube and I'll watch all 13 episodes of a Flash Gordon serial in black and white. And it's funny, people are in the comments are looking for the high definition version. I'm like, dude, it was made in the 1930s. This is the best definition you're going to get.
yeah.
So, but I can see other folks just can't get into that, but it made you use your imagination that much more,
I'll
you
tell
know.
you, I'll tell you one thing that has been an incredible thing for me, and I think for a lot of people. We used to have that square just about aspect ratio, the 4.3, I think it was.
4-to-3 ratio, yes.
And we when we had that, it's what we had, and boy, I just was enjoying everything, just that's what you're watching. But then they just widen up the screen to what we
Yep.
have here on YouTube, let's say.
Yep.
And man, thinking in I saw the documentary that I told you about these people from that isolated mountain. I went and searched and found a documentary about them on YouTube,
Yeah.
and it's recorded and filmed in that original
Yeah.
sort of 4:3.
Uh-huh.
And I automatically thought, "Oh, where's the rest of it?" Like in my
Yeah.
mind. And I had to sort of like reel myself back in because this is totally. I guess I'm used to it, but it's totally your peripherals
Mhm.
capture the edges, and it
Right.
feels comfortable.
Right. And that's a fairly recent event. They were still making the 4-to-3 aspect ratio. Oh my goodness. The last TV we bought was the old cathode ray tube style. We bought that in like 2000. Oh boy, we were living it was after 2006. But you had your choice of you could get the standard television, which was the 4-to-3 aspect ratio,
Hmm.
or you could go widescreen. And I wanted to get the widescreen. And my wife, she thought that was going to be a mistake because everything was being broadcast in standard 4-to-3 aspect ratio.
Hmm.
And this TV, the main reason we bought it was because it would automatically fill in those side panels. So
Right.
it would go by the height of the whatever was being broadcast and then fill in the sides. It didn't do the letterbox thing where you have the black stripe on top and the black stripe on the bottom. It didn't do that.
Right.
So, but I wanted that widescreen, and everything has gone to widescreen since. So you
It's
can't,
amazing.
it's hard to find that 4-to-3 aspect ratio anymore. But yeah, some of my earliest YouTube videos, you go way back and look, they're in that 4-to-3 aspect ratio because
Yeah.
that's what I had. That was the camera I had.
Yeah.
So,
Earlier YouTube videos have that.
mhm.
It's an amazing thing. I think that we've covered a fair amount of stuff, and I think that if you guys want to see more, listen to some of our older episodes, you could go to Trampled Underfoot Podcast.com and go into one of our what you call it, those
The
little
way
icons. What is it called?
the Wayback Machine.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah. If you go, it's a big red link right in the top center of the screen. You can't miss it. If you miss that link, you just aren't trying. And you click on that, you go back and you'll see every episode we've done from episode 1, way back when we were both young and spry and all this was greenfields. And up to today, as a matter of fact, I posted episode 46 this morning. It's there for your listening pleasure. TrampledUnderfootPodcast.com.
Yeah, and we're gonna go ahead and go over to the Facebook page, and I think Mark was gonna post a link. I'm gonna post some pictures of those people that I was mentioning, just so you can have an idea of what we are or we're talking about, and yeah, well, in fact, Mark, I don't know if you want any. I know you've been hustling today and stuff, but maybe throw a couple of those links to those movies or at least their trailers that you
Okay.
mentioned.
Okay, will do. I know Duck Soup is on YouTube. I do not know about 12 O'Clock High or American Graffiti. I kind of doubt American Graffiti, but I'll look for them. And at least we can get some links to them from the Internet Movie Database and maybe a trailer or 2 or 3.
All right, awesome. Well, I'll catch you next time, Mark.
All right, catch you later. Thank you, folks, for sticking with us. Thanks for dropping by. Y'all have a good night.
Good night.